the first decades of the 19th century, the American South presented a surface of orderly plantations, trading ports, and familiar social rituals. Yet beneath those routines lay an economy and culture dependent on human bondage. Enslaved people labored from dawn to dusk, subject to laws, punishments, and the constant threat of family separation. Into this world was born Nat Turner in Southampton County, Virginia, on October 2, 1800. He grew up within a tightly controlled society where avenues for peaceful redress were almost non-existent. By the early 1830s, tensions in Virginia and throughout the South were growing. Economic pressures, fear of revolt inspired by events elsewhere, and the everyday cruelties of plantation life combined to form a volatile setting. It was in this charged atmosphere that, in August 1831, a small, determined band of men, led by Nat Turner, launched an insurrection that would rapidly reverberate across the region. The rebellion was brief in duration, but profound in consequence. It forced Americans to reckon more directly with the contradictions of a republic that professed liberty while sustaining chattel slavery. In this segment, we will trace the life that led to that moment, the uprising itself, and the complex aftermath that followed. Nat Turner was born into slavery on a farm owned by Benjamin Turner. Accounts indicate that, unusually for an enslaved person of his time, he learned to read and write at a young age, and that he read the Bible with great intensity. Religion played a central role in the lives of many African Americans, and for Turner, Scripture provided both consolation and moral framework. He came to be known locally as a gifted preacher, someone who gathered small groups to discuss Scripture, and whose words carried weight in his community. Turner's biography also includes episodes of pain and mobility. He was hired out at times to other owners, observed the separations of families at slave markets, and witnessed corporal punishment firsthand. By the 1820s, he reported experiencing a series of visions and spiritual impressions, nocturnal images, unusual dreams, and what he took to be signs in nature, that strengthened his conviction that a decisive action against slavery was required. Historians debate how best to interpret these experiences. Some read them as personal religious fervor shaped by the biblical tradition. Others place them in the broader context of African-derived spiritual practices combined with the pressures of sustained trauma. At the national level, events and ideas offered both warning and inspiration. The Haitian Revolution, 1791-1804, remained a recent example of successful insurrection by formerly enslaved people. Abolitionist sentiment in the North was growing, and stories of rebellion contributed to heightened anxiety in the South. Virginia itself had a history of occasional unrest and of legislative anxiety about the political and economic stability of slaveholding society. Within this matrix, Turner A.'s convictions moved from private belief to public action. He began to recruit a small circle of trusted men, and to plan in secrecy an uprising that he believed was morally necessary. The plan took shape in the summer of 1831. Nat Turner and a small group of confidants met in darkness and in quiet places. They spoke of freedom, of justice, and of the obligation they felt to act. The date that crystallized for action was August 21st, 1831. On the morning before dawn, Turner and 6 comrades, identified in later accounts as Hark, Henry, Nelson, Sam, Will, and Jack, entered the house of Joseph Travis, a nearby farmer, and attacked. The killing of the Travis household was the opening of a revolt that moved quickly through Southampton County. From those opening hours, the movement evolved rapidly. As the band moved from plantation to plantation, more enslaved men joined, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes under duress. The rebels sought to recruit and to arm themselves, seizing weapons and horses when they could. Their actions combined elements of liberation, freeing enslaved people as they went, with direct attacks on slaveholders and overseers. Over the roughly 48-hour span of most intense activity, contemporary estimates and later scholarship suggest that approximately 50 to 60 white men, women, and children were killed. The number remains debated among historians, and different sources offer varying totals. What is certain is that the violence was concentrated and traumatic for the local white population. Word of the uprising spread with alarming speed. Local militias and volunteer posses were mobilized. Panic swept plantations and towns. In the weeks that followed, reprisals were brutal and far-reaching. In the immediate pursuit of the insurgents, white militias and neighbors killed many black people suspected of involvement. Some were executed after summary trials, others murdered without legal process. The toll on the black community exceeded the losses among white victims by several-fold. Modern estimates place the number of black people killed in the reprisals and subsequent unrest at well over 100, though exact counts vary. Nat Turner himself evaded capture for several weeks. He survived by hiding in swamps and in hollow trees, subsisting on wild roots and the occasional assistance of sympathetic black people who risked punishment to help him. His freedom ended on October 30th, 1831, when he was captured near Swan Pond and taken to the county seat of Jerusalem, today Cortland, Virginia. During his imprisonment, he was interviewed by Thomas R. Gray, a local attorney who recorded Turner's explanations of motive and meaning. Gray's publication, The Confessions of Nat Turner, appeared soon after Turner's execution and has shaped much subsequent interpretation. Turner was tried before a court in Southampton County, found guilty of insurrection and related crimes, and sentenced to death. On November 11, 1831, he was executed by hanging. Reports from the time describe the public spectacle of his death and the further mutilation of his body as a warning to others. For white Virginians, the execution was meant to restore order. For many enslaved people, Turner's death became a symbol of defiance, and his memory endured in whispered stories and in the private recollections of communities who shared his yearning for freedom. Interpreting Nat Turner's revolt requires attention to motive, method, and meaning. Motive is complex. Turner drew upon religious conviction, personal witness to cruelty, literacy and scriptural knowledge, and the social conditions that made peaceful change virtually impossible. His spiritual experiences, dreams, visions, and intense devotional practice provided him with moral certainty. Yet historians caution against simplifying these experiences into either pure fanaticism or simple political calculation. They existed in a cultural milieu where religious language was a primary idiom for understanding justice and change. Methodologically, the rebellion demonstrated both boldness and limits. Turner's small, mobile band achieved tactical surprise, and for a short period they seemed poised to widen unrest. But the insurgency lacked material resources, secure lines of communication, and broad coordination across the wider region. When faced with organized armed militia, the rebellion could not be sustained. In terms of meaning, the revolt exposed the deep anxieties of slave society. Southern lawmakers responded by tightening control. Northern abolitionists used the event to illustrate slavery's brutality. Turner's revolt thus became a mirror, revealing how a system that required daily coercion could also expect explosive responses when channels for justice were blocked. The debate among scholars continues. Was Turner primarily a religious actor compelled by visions, or was he a proto-revolutionary leader responding to political conditions? The answer likely contains elements of both. The immediate consequences were stark and unforgiving. In Virginia, and then in other southern states, authorities enacted a wave of repressive measures. Legislatures in the winter of 1831-1832 debated and enacted stricter laws, bans on the education of enslaved people, tighter restrictions on black worship and assembly, and expanded patrols and militia authority. The sense of vulnerability among slaveholders hardened pro-slavery rhetoric and policy. The rebellion also changed public discourse. In northern newspapers and among abolitionists, the uprising was framed as evidence of the moral rot of slavery, an institution that produced not only brutality, but also inevitable resistance. In the South, it became an argument for intensified control and, in some circles, for secessionist defensiveness. On a human level, the aftermath meant trauma and loss for black communities. Families were torn apart by executions and lynchings, and everyday life became more constrained. But the rebellion also entered the moral memory of the enslaved. Nat Turner's name circulated in hymns, stories, and private remembrances as an emblem of resistance. Over the longer term, the revolt contributed to the growing polarization of the United States, helping to shape the social and political tensions that would culminate in the Civil War 3 decades later.